The Wyoming Territory stretched endlessly beneath a merciless August sun, its brittle grasslands the color of old parchment. Dust devils danced across the horizon where the earth met a bleached sky, and the few streams that carved through this harsh landscape ran shallow and muddy. The town of Bitter Creek huddled against the base of red sandstone cliffs like a collection of weathered bones, 23 buildings in various states of disrepair, their wooden facades gray from years of wind and neglect. Margaret Calloway stood in the dim parlor of the boarding house, her black morning dress absorbing what little light filtered through the dusty windows. At 23, she possessed the kind of beauty that hardship had refined rather than destroyed. High cheekbones, eyes the color of prairie storm clouds, and auburn hair pulled severely back from her face. Her hands, once soft from a life of modest comfort, now bore the calluses of 6 months' labor as a laundress. 6 months since the mine explosion had taken James and left her with nothing but debt and the charity of strangers who grew less charitable by the day. It settled then. "Mrs. Holbrook announced, her voice carrying the finality of a judge's gavel. The boarding house proprietress, a woman whose face resembled dried leather stretched over sharp bones, folded her arms across her chest. "Mr. Thornton has agreed to the arrangement. The ceremony will be this Sunday after service." Margaret's fingers tightened on the back of the horsehair chair. "I haven't agreed to anything." "Haven't you?" Mrs. Holbrook's laugh was as dry as the wind outside. "Your account is 3 months overdue. You've no family to wire for money, no prospects for employment beyond what I've given you out of Christian kindness. Winter's coming, and I can't afford charity cases when paying customers need rooms." The other women in the parlor, the minister's wife, the schoolteacher, and 2 ranchers' wives, exchanged meaningful glances. Margaret had become a problem to be solved, a loose thread in the fabric of their small community. "Samuel Thornton is a good man," offered Mrs. Patterson, the minister's wife, though her voice lacked conviction. "He owns 400 acres up in Wolf Valley, runs cattle and horses. A woman could do worse." A woman could do worse. Margaret had heard that phrase too many times in the past weeks as the town's matrons conspired to dispose of her respectably. What they didn't say aloud was what everyone knew. Sam Thornton was a man who'd lived alone too long, who came to town only for supplies and spoke to no one beyond necessity. At 34, he'd outlived one wife, though no one spoke of how she'd died, and scared off any woman foolish enough to consider replacing her. "He's agreed to pay your debts," Mrs. Holbrook continued, producing a ledger from her apron pocket. $47 for room and board, $12 to Henderson's store, $8 to the doctor for when you took ill last month. That's nearly $70. Mrs. Calloway, more than you could earn in a year. Margaret's throat constricted. $70. It might as well have been $700. "I need more time. I can take in more washing. Perhaps find work at—" "There is no more work." The schoolteacher, Miss Eliza Crane, spoke gently but firmly. "The railroad crews have moved on. The town can barely support the businesses we have. You know this." She did know, had known for weeks as her options dwindled like water in a drought. The other women watched her with expressions ranging from pity to impatience. She was young, relatively pretty, and capable of bearing children. In their calculus, she should be grateful for any offer of marriage, especially from a man with property. "When may I meet Mr. Thornton?" Margaret asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "He'll be here Sunday for the ceremony," Mrs. Holbrook replied. "He's not a man for courtship and flowers, if that's what you're hoping. But he's agreed to provide for you proper-like. You'll have a roof, food, protection. That's more than many have in this territory." The door opened, admitting a gust of hot wind and Pastor Patterson, a thin man who seemed perpetually bent forward as if walking against an invisible gale. "Ladies," he greeted, removing his hat. His eyes found Margaret. "Mrs. Calloway, I trust the arrangements have been explained?" "They have." Margaret stood, her legs unsteady. "If you'll excuse me, I have washing to finish." She fled before anyone could respond. pushing through the back door into the blazing afternoon. The wash house stood 20 yards behind the boarding house, a lean-to structure that trapped heat like an oven. Margaret plunged her hands into the tepid water of the wash tub, scrubbing a stranger's shirt with mechanical precision while tears burned her eyes. James had been dead 6 months, 6 months of wearing black, of waking to emptiness, of learning how quickly a woman could fall from respectability to desperation. They'd had such plans, to save enough for their own small ranch, to have children who would grow up under wide skies. Instead, she was being bartered like livestock to a man she'd never met, a man whose reputation suggested he was as hard and unforgiving as the land he worked. Sunday arrived with a dawn the color of dried blood. Margaret stood before the cracked mirror in her small room, pinning her hair with trembling fingers. She'd met Samuel Thornton exactly once, the previous evening when he'd arrived to sign papers with Pastor Patterson. He was everything the gossips had suggested, tall and broad-shouldered, with weathered skin and eyes like chips of granite. He'd looked at her the way a man might assess a horse at auction, thoroughly but without emotion. Before nodding once and turning away, the church bell tolled, its bronze voice carrying across the desert. Margaret walked the dusty street in her best dress, gray wool, as she'd sold her blue silk weeks ago, while curious faces peered from windows and doorways. The entire town would witness this transaction disguised as a sacrament. Inside the church, Sam Thornton waited at the altar. He wore a black suit that looked uncomfortable on his large frame, his dark hair slicked back with pomade. When she approached, he didn't smile or offer his hand. Pastor Patterson opened his prayer book with the enthusiasm of a man reading a list of grain prices. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." The words washed over Margaret like water over stone. She responded when prompted, her voice mechanical. When Pastor Patterson asked if anyone objected to this union, the silence stretched long enough that Margaret almost objected herself. Then the moment passed. "Do you, Samuel James Thornton, take this woman?" "I do." His voice was deep, rough as unplaned wood. "Do you, Margaret Rose Calloway, take this man?" Margaret's throat closed. Through the church window, she could see the vast emptiness of the territory, the mountains rising like prison walls in the distance. "Mrs." Holbrook shifted impatiently in the front pew. The banker who held her debts cleared his throat. "Mrs. Calloway," the pastor prompted. "I'm not ready," she whispered, tears starting down her cheeks. "I'm not ready for this." Sam Thornton's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his gray eyes. Impatience, perhaps, or resignation. His hand closed around her elbow, not roughly but with unmistakable firmness. "You are now," he said quietly, for her ears alone. Then, louder, "She does." Pastor Patterson, eager to be done with this awkward business, hurried through the final pronouncements. "Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I pronounce you man and wife." There was no kiss. Sam Thornton simply took her arm and guided her down the aisle past the watching faces, out into the harsh light where a wagon waited. Her single trunk was already loaded in the back. He helped her up onto the bench seat with surprising gentleness, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. As they rolled out of Bitter Creek, Margaret didn't look back. Behind them, the church bell tolled once more, a lonely sound that seemed to follow them into the wilderness. The road wound north through sagebrush and stone, toward mountains that looked like broken teeth against the sky. Sam Thornton said nothing, his attention fixed on the horses and the rutted track ahead. Margaret pressed her handkerchief to her eyes and tried not to think about James, about the life that had exploded along with the mine shaft, about the woman she'd been just 6 months ago. That woman was as dead as her husband. Now she was Mrs. Samuel Thornton, wife to a stranger, bound for a ranch she'd never seen in a valley named for wolves. The sun climbed higher, casting their shadow before them like a dark prophecy on the dusty road. The ranch house materialized from the landscape like a mirage turned solid. a low structure of weathered logs and rough-hewn planks, its tin roof gleaming dully under the afternoon sun. It squatted alone in a valley bounded by red cliffs and pine-covered ridges, 20 miles from the nearest neighbor, 30 from town. A barn and several outbuildings clustered nearby, all bearing the same weather-beaten appearance of structures that endured rather than thrived. Sam Thornton pulled the wagon to a stop before the house. Margaret stared at what would be her home, her heart sinking. The windows were few and small, defensive against winter storms. No flowers softened the harsh lines. No curtain suggested warmth within. A porch ran the length of the front, its boards warped and gray. In the distance, she could hear cattle lowing and the haunting cry of a hawk circling overhead. "This is it," Sam said, his first words in 3 hours. He climbed down and came around to help her from the wagon. His hands were firm at her waist, lifting her down as if she weighed nothing. He released her immediately and began unloading her trunk. Margaret followed him inside, her eyes adjusting to the dimness. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, dominated by a massive iron stove and a rough plank table. The walls were bare logs, chinked with mud. A few shelves held dishes and supplies. 2 doors led off the main room, one to what must be a bedroom, the other perhaps to storage. "Bedroom's through there," Sam said, nodding toward the first door as he set down her trunk. "There's a dresser for your things. Privy's out back, pumps by the kitchen door. I'll be in the barn." He turned to leave, but Margaret found her voice. "Wait, that's all? You bring me here and just leave?" He paused in the doorway, his broad back to her. "What else is there to say? You know why you're here. I know why you're here. No point dancing around it." "I don't even know you." "You know enough." He half-turned, his profile sharp against the light. "I needed a wife. You needed a husband. Simple as that. I'll expect supper at 6. The door closed behind him with finality. Margaret stood alone in the strange kitchen, her hands trembling. Through the window, she watched him stride toward the barn, his movements purposeful and contained. She was married to that stranger, bound by law and circumstance to this desolate place. She explored her new domain with growing dismay. The bedroom held a large bed with a faded quilt, a dresser with a cracked mirror, and pegs on the wall for clothing. Sam's belongings occupied one side, a few shirts, worn pants, a winter coat. The other side waited empty for her things. The intimacy of the shared space made her stomach clench. Back in the kitchen, she investigated the supplies. The pantry held basics: flour, salt, coffee, beans, dried beef. A root cellar door revealed potatoes, onions, and preserves. At least she wouldn't starve. She found wood stacked by the stove and managed to start a fire after several attempts. Her hands, accustomed to washboards and lye soap, fumbled with the unfamiliar cookware. By evening, she had managed a simple meal of beans, biscuits, and coffee. The sun was setting, painting the cliffs blood red. When Sam returned, he washed at the pump outside before entering, bringing with him the smell of horses and hay. He sat at the table without comment, ate methodically, and pushed back his plate when finished. "It'll do," he said. "You'll learn." Margaret bristled. "I can cook well enough. I just need time to learn your stove, your supplies." "I said it'll do." His tone brooked no argument. He stood, took his plate to the wash basin. "I rise at 4:30. Breakfast at 5. I'll be working the north pasture tomorrow. Won't be back till supper." He moved toward the bedroom. Margaret remained frozen at the table, her heart pounding. This was the moment she'd dreaded all day, the moment when the transaction would be completed, when she would pay the price for her rescue from destitution. "Come to bed," Sam said from the doorway. It wasn't a request. I need to clean the dishes first. They'll keep till morning." Margaret rose on unsteady legs. In the bedroom, Sam was already removing his boots, hanging his shirt on a peg. His back was broad and marked with old scars, from work or violence. She couldn't tell. He blew out the lamp, plunging the room into darkness, relieved only by moonlight through the small window. She undressed slowly, down to her chemise, and slipped beneath the covers. The bed dipped as Sam joined her. For a moment, they lay in silence, a foot of space between them. Then his hand found her shoulder. "I know you're not ready," he said, his voice quiet in the darkness. "But you're my wife now. This is part of it." Margaret bit her lip to keep from crying out as he moved closer. She stared at the ceiling, at the shadows cast by moonlight, and tried to think of nothing at all. Sam was not rough, exactly, but neither was he gentle. He took what he considered his due with the same methodical efficiency he'd shown at supper. When he finished, he turned away and was soon snoring. Margaret lay awake for hours, tears sliding silently into the pillow. Her body ached, but worse was the hollow feeling in her chest. She thought of James, of their wedding night in a Denver hotel, the tenderness, the laughter, the sense of beginning something wonderful together. That girl seemed like a stranger now, as distant as the stars visible through the window. Dawn came too soon. Sam rose and dressed in the dark, leaving Margaret to feign sleep. She heard him in the kitchen, making coffee, then the door closing as he left for the barn. Only then did she rise, washing herself with cold water from the pitcher, trying to scrub away the memory of the night. The days fell into a pattern. Sam left early, returned late. Margaret learned the rhythms of the ranch, when to have meals ready, how to manage the temperamental stove, where to find eggs from the chickens that roosted behind the house. She mended his clothes, kept the house clean, and cooked meals that grew more competent with practice. They spoke little. Sam communicated mainly in directives. The fence in the east pasture needs attention. The barn cat had kittens that need drowning. Supplies would be needed from town next month. Margaret responded with equal brevity. At night, he claimed his marital rights with the same wordless efficiency. She endured, staring at the ceiling, counting the minutes until he rolled away. 2 weeks into this arrangement, Margaret ventured outside to explore her surroundings. The ranch stretched for miles in every direction, grassland dotted with sage, bordered by pine forests and red rock formations. It was beautiful in its savage way, but the isolation pressed against her like a weight. At night, wolves howled in the mountains, their cries echoing through the valley. Once, she saw their shadows moving along a ridge, dark shapes against the stars. The first time Sam took her to town for supplies, Margaret felt both relief and dread. The familiar buildings of Bitter Creek seemed smaller somehow, shabbier. At Henderson's store, women she'd known fell silent when she entered. Their eyes took in her plain dress, her work-roughened hands, the way she stood slightly apart from her husband. "Mrs. Thornton." "Mrs." Patterson greeted with false brightness. "How are you settling in?" "Well enough, thank you." Margaret kept her voice steady, aware of the listening ears. "That valley's awful lonesome," said another woman, her tone suggesting both sympathy and satisfaction. "Must be quite a change from town living." "All changes require adjustment," Margaret replied, selecting supplies with careful attention. Sam conducted his business with the store owner, purchasing flour, coffee, ammunition. He spoke to no one else, ignoring the curious glances and whispered speculations. When their wagon was loaded, he helped Margaret up and drove out of town without a backward glance. "They pity me," Margaret said as the town disappeared behind them. "Let them." Sam kept his eyes on the road. "Their opinions don't put food on our table or keep wolves from our door." That night, a storm rolled through the valley. Lightning illuminated the bedroom in stark flashes while thunder shook the walls. Margaret huddled under the quilt, remembering how James had held her during storms, whispering silly stories to distract her from her fear. Sam lay beside her, awake but silent. When a particularly loud crash made her flinch, he spoke. "It'll pass. House has weathered worse." It wasn't comfort, exactly, but it was more than he'd offered before. Margaret pressed her face into the pillow and waited for morning, for the storm to pass, for the day when this strange, harsh life might feel like something other than a prison made of sky and stone. The morning after the storm dawned crystal clear, the air washed clean and sharp with the scent of sage. Margaret rose to find Sam already gone, leaving muddy boot prints across her freshly scrubbed floor. She stared at the tracks with a mixture of resignation and anger, then fetched the mop. This was her life now, an endless cycle of cooking, cleaning, and silent meals with a man who seemed to view her as another piece of ranch equipment. She was hanging laundry when she heard horses approaching. 3 riders appeared on the ridge, making their way down the trail toward the house. Margaret's hand went to her throat. Visitors were rare, and Sam hadn't mentioned expecting anyone. The lead rider was a man in his 40s, well-dressed in a black coat despite the heat. His companions were younger, rougher-looking, with pistols prominent on their hips. They reined up at the porch where Margaret stood clutching a wet shirt. "Mrs. Thornton, I presume?" The well-dressed man touched his hat. "Jake Morrison. I own the trading post over in Cedar Ridge. These are my associates, Mr. Daniels and Mr. Polk." "My husband isn't here," Margaret said, instinctively stepping back toward the door. Morrison smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Actually, it's you I came to see. Wanted to welcome you proper to the territory. Must be quite an adjustment for a lady of your refinement." The way he said refinement made Margaret's skin crawl. "That's kind of you, Mr. Morrison, but I have work to attend to. Surely you can spare a moment for neighbors." He dismounted without invitation, his men following suit. "I knew your late husband. You know, James Calloway. Terrible tragedy at the mine." Margaret's breath caught. "You knew James? Did some business together before his unfortunate end? He spoke of you often, said you had the prettiest singing voice in Colorado." Morrison stepped closer, and Margaret could smell whiskey on his breath despite the early hour. "Sam Thornton's a lucky man, getting himself such a prize, though I wonder if he appreciates what he has. I'll ask you to leave now." Margaret's voice shook, but she stood her ground. Morrison's smile widened. "No offense meant, Mrs. Thornton. Just making conversation. See, I've been thinking, a woman like you, educated and all, might find herself bored out here. If you ever need companionship, or perhaps some extra income, I run various enterprises that could use a woman's touch." One of his men snickered. Margaret's face burned as she understood the implication. "Get off our land." Sam's voice came from behind Morrison, cold as winter wind. He stood at the corner of the house, rifle in hand, though not yet raised. "Now," Morrison turned slowly, unperturbed. "Thornton, just paying our respects to your bride. Your respects aren't wanted." Sam moved between Morrison and Margaret. "You know the way out. Use it. No need for hostility," Morrison said. But his casual tone had an edge now. "Though a man in your position might want to think twice about making enemies. Isolated ranch like this. Accidents can happen. Wolves, rustlers, fires." Sam raised the rifle, aiming at Morrison's chest. "Accidents can happen right here and now. Your choice." The 2 men locked eyes for a long moment. Then Morrison laughed, stepping back toward his horse. "We'll be going, Mrs. Thornton. You remember what I said about opportunities. A woman should always have options." They mounted and rode away, but Morrison looked back once, tipping his hat to Margaret with mocking courtesy. Sam watched until they disappeared over the ridge before lowering the rifle. "Pack a bag," he said without looking at her. "What?" "You're going back to town. Today." Margaret stared at his rigid back. "Because of them? I didn't invite—" "I know what you didn't do." He turned then, and she saw something raw in his eyes. "Morrison's trouble. Has been for years. Runs cattle that aren't his, among other things. He's testing me, seeing if having a wife makes me weak. Then sending me away proves him right. Better than proving him right by letting him." Sam cut himself off, jaw clenching. "I'm not going anywhere," Margaret said, surprising herself with her vehemence. "I won't be driven off by some whiskey-breathed bully. This is my home now, whether I chose it or not." Sam studied her, that granite gaze searching her face. "Morrison doesn't make idle threats. He's got men, connections. The law looks the other way because he greases the right palms. Then we deal with it together. Isn't that what married people do? A bitter smile touched his lips. We're not that kind of married. Margaret, the use of her name, the first time he'd said it since their wedding, made her breath catch. Maybe not, but I'm here, and I'm staying. That night, Sam barred the door and shuttered the windows. He cleaned his rifle and pistol at the kitchen table while Margaret mended a torn shirt. The silence between them felt different, still heavy, but charged with shared wariness rather than mere isolation. "Why does Morrison have a grudge against you?" Margaret finally asked. Sam was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "He wanted to buy this land 5 years ago. I outbid him. Then he tried to run me off. Dead cattle, poisoned water holes, burned hay. I caught 2 of his men red-handed." He paused. "They didn't make it to trial." Margaret's needle stilled. She understood what he wasn't saying. "Is that why people in town?" "Part of it." Sam set down the rifle, running a hand through his dark hair. "I'm not a social man by nature, less so after Mary died. His first wife." Margaret had wondered when he would mention her. "How did she die?" "Fever, 3 winters ago." His voice was flat, factual. "Doc couldn't make it out in the blizzard. I watched her burn up and fade away over 4 days. Nothing I could do. I'm sorry." He shrugged. "Life out here is hard. Takes more than it gives." "Then why stay?" Sam looked at her then. Really looked at her. "Where else would I go? This land is all I know. All I'm good for." They sat in silence as the fire burned low. Finally, Sam stood. "Morrison will be back. Maybe not tomorrow, but soon. You need to learn to shoot." "I know how to shoot." At his skeptical look, she added, "James taught me. We practiced with tin cans behind our boarding house in Denver. Tin cans don't shoot back." But there was something like approval in his tone. "We'll practice tomorrow. See what you remember." That night in bed, Sam lay with his back to her as usual. But when coyotes howled in the distance, he spoke into the darkness. "You could have had me take you back. Why didn't you?" Margaret considered her answer. "Because running from one prison to another solves nothing. At least here. I know what I'm fighting." She felt him shift, perhaps to look at her, but the darkness hid his expression. After a moment, he settled again. "Get some sleep. Long day tomorrow." The next morning, true to his word, Sam set up targets behind the barn. He watched critically as Margaret handled the heavy Colt revolver, correcting her stance, her grip. Her first shots went wide, but muscle memory returned. By the 6th shot, she hit the target square. "Better than I expected," Sam admitted. "But targets don't move. Don't threaten back." He moved closer, adjusting her arms. It was the most he'd touched her outside their bedroom, and Margaret was surprised by her body's reaction, not revulsion, but a flutter of something else. His hands were calloused but careful, his instruction patient. "When Morrison comes, and he will, you shoot first and worry about consequences later. Understood?" "Yes." "Don't hesitate because he's smiling or talking pretty. Men like him count on women being too polite to defend themselves. I'm learning not to be polite." Sam almost smiled, a quick quirk of his lips that transformed his face for an instant. "Good. Again." They practiced until Margaret's arms ached and her ears rang. As they walked back to the house, Sam spoke again. "That offer Morrison made, about opportunities. You know what he meant?" Heat flooded Margaret's face. "Yes. Just so we're clear. You're my wife. That means something. Even if our marriage isn't conventional. Anyone insults you, threatens you, they answer to me." It was the closest thing to protection, to care, that he'd offered. Margaret nodded, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in her throat. That evening, as she served supper, she noticed Sam watching her differently, not with the blank assessment of before, but with something like curiosity. When their fingers brushed as she handed him his plate, neither pulled away immediately. Later, as they prepared for bed, Margaret found herself speaking. "Those men you killed. Morrison's men. Do you regret it?" Sam paused in unbuttoning his shirt. "No. They were poisoning my water, killing my stock. Would have killed me if I'd let them. The town judges you for it. The town judges me for many things. Being unsociable, marrying above my station, not dying when Morrison wanted me to." He looked at her directly. "Do you judge me for it?" Margaret considered. A month ago? She would have been horrified. Now, after Morrison's visit, she understood the brutal mathematics of survival out here. "No, you did what you had to." Something shifted in Sam's expression. A softening, perhaps, or recognition. He nodded once and continued preparing for bed. That night, when he reached for her, his touch was marginally gentler. And when he finished, he didn't immediately turn away. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for staying." Margaret lay still, processing this tiny crack in his armor. Outside, wolves howled in the mountains, a lonely, wild sound that no longer seemed quite as threatening as before. She was learning the language of this place, these silences. Learning that survival sometimes meant becoming harder than the land itself. And perhaps, she thought as sleep finally took her, learning that the man beside her was more than the stone he pretended to be. The storm announced itself with a wall of dust that turned the afternoon sky bronze. Margaret watched from the porch as Sam drove the cattle toward the barn, his figure barely visible through the swirling grit. Lightning flickered along the mountain ridges, and the air crackled with electricity that made her hair stand on end. "Get inside," Sam shouted over the rising wind. "Secure everything you can." Margaret ran to pull the laundry from the line, sheets snapping like whips in the gale. The chickens squawked in panic, scattering as she herded them into their coop. By the time she reached the house, the first fat raindrops were falling, mixed with hail the size of marbles. Sam burst through the door moments later, soaked and breathing hard. "The barn's as secure as I can make it. This is going to be bad." As if to punctuate his words, thunder crashed directly overhead, rattling the windows. The rain became a solid wall of water, hammering the roof with such force that conversation became impossible. They worked together in the dim light, stuffing rags under doors, moving supplies away from areas where the roof had begun to leak. Then came a sound like a freight train bearing down on them. Sam grabbed Margaret, pulling her against the far wall just as something massive struck the house. The roof beam above the kitchen split with a crack like a rifle shot. Water poured through the gap, turning the floor into a river. "The bedroom!" Sam yelled. They stumbled through the darkness as another impact shook the house. A tree branch, or perhaps part of the barn roof. In the bedroom, they huddled against the wall. Sam's arm tight around Margaret as the storm tried to tear their shelter apart. Hours passed in terror. The wind screamed like a living thing, seeking entry through every crack and gap. At one point, Margaret felt Sam's body tense as an ominous creaking came from above. "If the roof goes," he started. "It won't," Margaret said fiercely, as if her will alone could hold the timbers together. Lightning illuminated Sam's face, and she saw fear there, not for himself, she realized, but for her. His arm tightened, pulling her closer against his chest. For the first time since their wedding, the contact felt like protection rather than possession. Dawn came pale and watery, revealing devastation. The storm had passed, leaving eerie silence in its wake. They emerged from the bedroom to find the kitchen half flooded, the roof sagging ominously. Outside was worse. The barn door had been ripped off its hinges. Fence posts lay scattered like matchsticks. In the pasture, 3 cattle lay motionless, struck by lightning or debris. Sam surveyed the damage, his face grim. "We've lost at least a third of the hay, maybe more. The well pump's damaged, and the chicken coop." He gestured at the splintered remains. Margaret counted 4 dead chickens among the wreckage. The survivors huddled in miserable clumps, feathers bedraggled. "We can rebuild the coop," she said. "Save what chickens we can." "With what?" Sam's voice was flat. "We barely had enough to get through winter as it was." Now. They spent the day in salvage operations. Margaret collected scattered tools and supplies while Sam assessed the structural damage. The barn could be repaired, but it would take lumber they'd have to buy on credit. The damaged roof needed immediate attention before the next rain. The lost hay meant they'd have to sell cattle early, at poor prices. As the sun set, they sat exhausted at the tilted kitchen table, sharing a meager supper of biscuits and preserves. Sam had been silent for hours, his face dark with calculation. "I'll have to go to Morrison," he said finally. "No." Margaret set down her cup hard. "There has to be another way. He's the only one who'll extend credit. The bank won't loan to me, not after the trouble before. Then we'll make do without credit. Sell what cattle we must, fix what we can ourselves. With winter coming, we'll starve, Margaret, or freeze when we can't patch the roof proper." He rubbed his face, looking older than his years. "I've no choice. You always have a choice." She leaned forward. "Morrison will own you if you take his money. That's what he wants, you under his thumb." Sam's laugh was bitter. "As opposed to now, when I'm free as a bird." They stared at each other across the damaged kitchen. Then Margaret rose, moving to the window where the last light painted the devastated ranch in shades of gold and shadow. "In Denver," she said quietly, "after the mine explosion, men came to me, offering help, loans with impossible terms, positions that weren't really positions. I know what it means to be desperate. Sam, to feel like there's no choice but to accept whatever's offered. What did you do?" "I took Mrs. Holbrook's charity and washed strangers' clothes until my hands bled. I sold everything I owned except my wedding ring." She touched her bare finger unconsciously. Even that had gone to pay for food eventually. "And when that wasn't enough, I married you. A devil's bargain." She turned to face him. "Was it? I'm alive. I have food, shelter, work that matters, and a husband who just spent a storm making sure I was safe instead of saving his cattle." Sam looked away. "The cattle can be replaced. So can hay and timber, but not your self-respect, not your freedom." She moved back to the table, covering his work-worn hand with hers. It was the first time she'd voluntarily touched him. "We'll find another way. We have to." He stared at their joined hands as if they belonged to strangers. "You sound like Mary," he said quietly. "She always believed things would work out." "Did they?" She died believing it, but his hand turned under hers, fingers interlacing. "All right, we'll try it your way. But if we're doing this, we do it together. No more separate bedrooms in spirit, if not in fact." Margaret's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I married you for practical reasons, same as you married me. But watching you today, working beside me, facing down the storm, made me think maybe there's more to it. Could be more, if we let it." The oil lamp flickered between them, casting dancing shadows. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the darkness. Margaret squeezed his hand. "I'd like that," she whispered, that night when they went to bed. Something had changed. Sam's touch was tentative, questioning rather than claiming. When he kissed her, the first real kiss since their wedding, Margaret found herself responding. Not with passion, not yet, but with a warmth that surprised them both. Later, as they lay entwined, Sam spoke into the darkness. "I'll ride to Cedar Falls tomorrow. There's a man there who might extend credit, owes me a favor from years back. I'll come with you. It's a hard ride, 2 days each way. Then I'd better learn to ride harder." She felt him smile against her hair. "You're stubborn, Margaret Thornton. I learned from watching you." They spent the next days in desperate activity. Sam taught Margaret to handle the ranch work, how to move cattle, repair fences, manage horses. Her hands blistered and her muscles screamed, but she persisted. Together they patched what they could, rationed what remained, and prepared for the journey to Cedar Falls. The night before departure, as they loaded the wagon with goods to trade, Sam paused. "That first night," he said suddenly, "our wedding night, I shouldn't have... Not like that. You deserved better. Margaret looked up at him, this hard man learning to bend. We both did what we thought we had to, but we're not those people anymore, are we? He pulled her close, resting his chin on her head. No, we're not. In the morning, they set out together into the vast landscape, the damaged ranch behind them and uncertain hope ahead. The mountains rose purple and distant, holding both promise and threat. But for the first time since James's death, Margaret felt something other than grief and resignation. Beside her, Sam handled the reins with quiet confidence, occasionally glancing her way with something approaching tenderness. They'd lost much in the storm: hay, cattle, security. But perhaps, Margaret thought as the sun climbed higher, they'd found something worth more than all of it. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it. Fragile as new grass after rain, stubborn as life itself in this harsh and beautiful land. The trouble started with missing cattle. Sam noticed it first. 5 had gone from the north pasture, then 3 more from near the creek. The tracks led toward Morrison's land before disappearing in rocky ground. By the 3rd week, they'd lost nearly 20 head, each theft bolder than the last. They're testing us, Sam said, checking his rifle for the dozenth time, seeing how much we'll take before we break. Margaret watched him pace the kitchen, tension radiating from every line of his body. They'd returned from Cedar Falls with enough credit to patch the roof and buy winter supplies, but losing cattle meant losing everything. What about the sheriff? Sheriff Dalton? Sam's laugh was harsh. He's been in Morrison's pocket for years. Won't even ride out here to look at the evidence. Word spread through the valley like wildfire. At Henderson's store, conversation stopped when Margaret entered. She overheard fragments. Thornton's losing his grip, and Morrison always gets what he wants eventually. Even those who'd been friendly before now kept their distance, not wanting to be caught in the crossfire. Maybe you should reconsider Morrison's offer. Mrs., Patterson suggested while Margaret selected flour. A man needs to know when he's beaten. Sam's not beaten, Margaret replied firmly, and neither am I. The older woman shook her head. Pride goes before a fall. Mrs. Thornton and falls can be fatal out here. That night, Sam made his decision. I'm riding out to the North Valley tomorrow. That's where they'll hit next. It's isolated, easy access to Morrison's land. When they come, I'll be waiting. You can't go alone. Margaret gripped his arm. It's what they want, to catch you outnumbered. Better than letting them bleed us dry. He covered her hand with his. I've fought worse odds before. Not for me, you haven't. She met his eyes steadily. I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. You taught me to shoot. Let me help. They argued long into the night, but Margaret wouldn't yield. Finally, Sam relented. You stay hidden unless things go bad. Promise me. I promise to do what needs doing, she said, which wasn't the same thing at all. They rode out before dawn, taking position in a cluster of rocks overlooking the small herd they'd used as bait. The morning passed slowly, the sun climbing higher, baking the earth. Margaret's rifle grew heavy in her hands. Beside her, Sam remained motionless, patient as the stones themselves. Near noon, dust appeared on the horizon. 4 riders, moving fast and purposeful. Margaret recognized 2 from Morrison's earlier visit, Daniels and Polk. The others were strangers, hard-faced men who rode with hands near their guns. Stay down, Sam whispered. No matter what happens? The riders circled the cattle, whooping and firing shots to scatter them. Sam rose from cover, rifle aimed. That's far enough. The men wheeled their horses, hands dropping to pistols. Daniels grinned. Well, look here, boys. Thornton thinks he's going to stop us all by himself. Turn around and ride out, Sam commanded. Last warning. 4 against 1 ain't good odds. Thornton, Polk called. Why don't you be smart for once? Who says I'm alone? Margaret stood, her rifle trained on Polk. The men's surprise lasted only a moment before Daniels laughed. You brought your woman? That's touching. Thornton, real touching. The lady can shoot, Sam said evenly. Ask Morrison about the targets she's been hitting. Enough talk, one of the strangers said, his hand inching toward his pistol. Morrison wants those cattle, and he's paying us to... Sam's rifle cracked, the bullet kicking up dust at the stranger's horse's feet. The animal reared, nearly throwing its rider. Next one goes in you, Sam warned. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then everything happened at once. Daniels drew and fired, the bullet whining off the rocks near Sam. Sam's return shot caught Daniels in the shoulder, spinning him from his horse. Margaret fired at Polk as he raised his gun, her shot going wide but causing him to duck. The remaining men opened fire, forcing Sam and Margaret to take cover as bullets sparked off stone. Margaret's heart hammered as she reloaded, Sam's calm instructions echoing in her mind. She risked a glance around the rock and saw one of the strangers trying to flank them. "Sam, on your left!" Sam pivoted and fired in one motion. The stranger clutched his leg and toppled from his saddle. Polk, seeing the tide turning, spurred his horse toward Margaret's position. She stood, aimed, and squeezed the trigger. This time, she didn't miss. Polk jerked and slumped forward, his horse carrying him away from the fight. The last stranger threw down his gun. "I'm done! I'm done!" "Get Daniels and ride out," Sam ordered, keeping his rifle trained on the man. "Tell Morrison this is finished. He sends anyone else. They won't ride away." The stranger helped the wounded Daniels onto a horse. As they prepared to leave, Daniels looked back, his face twisted with pain and rage. "This ain't over. Thornton, Mr. Morrison don't forget, and he don't forgive." "Neither do I," Sam replied. They watched the riders disappear. Then Sam turned to Margaret. His face was white beneath the tan. "You all right?" She nodded, though her hands shook as she lowered the rifle. "I think I hit Polk. You did what you had to." He pulled her against him, and she felt him trembling too. "You saved my life. That flanking move would have had me." They held each other among the rocks. Two people who'd faced death together and survived. When they finally pulled apart, something fundamental had changed between them. The shared danger had burned away the last walls. "They'll be back," Margaret said. "With more men." "Maybe. Or maybe Morrison will decide we're more trouble than we're worth." Sam looked out over the valley, then back at her. "Either way, we'll be ready. Together." They rounded up the scattered cattle and headed home as the sun sank low. Neither spoke of what had happened, but their silence was comfortable now, born of understanding rather than awkwardness. That night, Sam held her close, murmuring words of pride and gratitude. Margaret pressed her face against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, and realized with a start that she couldn't imagine being anywhere else. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Not Morrison's men, but 3 neighboring ranchers Sam had barely spoken to in years. They sat at the kitchen table, hats in hand, while Margaret served coffee. "Heard about the fight," said Tom Brennan, the eldest. 4 against 2, and you sent them packing." Margaret did her share, Sam said, his hand finding hers. "That's what we heard." Brennan exchanged glances with the others. "Look, Thornton, we've had our differences. You keep to yourself. Don't neighbor much. But Morrison's been pushing all of us. Altered brands, cut fences, poisoned water. We've taken it because we figured it was every man for himself out here." "What's changed?" Sam asked. "You have," said another rancher. "Young Pete Carson. Standing up to him like that, protecting what's yours, made us think maybe it's time we stopped letting Morrison run roughshod over the valley. What are you proposing?" "An alliance," Brennan said. "We watch each other's herds, ride our boundaries together. Morrison can pick us off one by one, but not if we stand together." Sam looked at Margaret, a question in his eyes. She squeezed his hand and nodded. "All right," Sam said. "But if we do this, we do it proper. Regular meetings, shared information, mutual defense. No backing out when things get hard." The men agreed, shaking hands all around as they prepared to leave. Brennan paused at the door. "Your wife's got sand. Thornton, We could use more like her in this valley." After they left, Sam pulled Margaret close. "You've changed everything," he said softly. "Before you came, I was just existing, defending my land because I didn't know what else to do. Now I've got something worth fighting for. We both do," Margaret whispered. That night, as they lay together, Margaret thought about the twists of fate that had brought her here. 6 months ago, she'd been a broken widow with no options. Now she was a rancher's wife who could shoot straight and face down cattle thieves. The transformation should have frightened her, but instead she felt more herself than she had in years. "I need to tell you something," she said into the darkness. "Today, when those men came, when I thought you might die, I realized I couldn't bear to lose you. Not now." Sam's arms tightened around her. "You won't. I promise you that." Outside, wolves howled in the mountains, but the sound no longer seemed threatening. It was just part of the wild symphony of this land, dangerous, yes, but also fiercely beautiful, like the man beside her, like the life they were building together against all odds. The war with Morrison wasn't over. There would be more fights, more challenges. But for the first time since stepping off that wagon months ago, Margaret truly believed they could win. Not just survive, but thrive. Together. The shot came at dusk, when the light was tricky and shadows played games with a man's vision. Sam was checking the horses when the bullet caught him high in the chest, spinning him backward into the dirt. Margaret heard the crack of the rifle, saw him fall, and her world tilted off its axis. "Sam!" She dropped the water bucket and ran, her skirts tangling as she threw herself down beside him. Blood was already soaking through his shirt, spreading dark and ominous. His face had gone gray, his breathing shallow and pained. "Get inside," he managed, trying to push her away. "They might—" Another shot whined overhead, and Margaret realized with cold clarity that the shooter was still out there. She half-dragged, half-carried Sam toward the house, his weight nearly bringing them both down. They crashed through the door just as another bullet splintered the frame. Inside, she propped him against the wall and grabbed the rifle, firing blindly out the window to keep the shooter at bay. In the growing darkness, she couldn't see anyone, but she could feel them out there, waiting. "Let me see," she said, turning back to Sam. Her hands shook as she unbuttoned his shirt. The wound was bad, high on the right side, bleeding freely. She'd seen enough hunting injuries to know it had missed the lung, but that was the only good news. "Morrison's men," Sam gasped. "Knew they'd try something?" "Don't talk." Margaret pressed a folded cloth against the wound, fighting panic as blood seeped through immediately. "I need to get help. The Brennan Ranch—" "Can't leave. They're watching." His hand caught hers, weak but insistent. "Remember what I taught you. Defend the house." The next hours were the longest of Margaret's life. She barricaded the windows, loaded every weapon they had, and tried to stem Sam's bleeding. Outside, she could hear movement, boots on gravel, whispered voices. They were surrounding the house, waiting for full dark or for Sam to die, whichever came first. Sam drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling about Mary, about the ranch, about things Margaret didn't understand. His skin burned with fever, and the bleeding wouldn't stop no matter how many bandages she applied. "Near midnight," she heard Morrison's voice. "Mrs. Thornton, no need for anyone else to get hurt. Send Thornton out, and you can go free. I'll even give you traveling money. Help you get back to Denver." "Go to hell," Margaret shouted back, surprised by the venom in her voice. Now. No need for that language. Your husband's probably dead already. Why die for a lost cause?" Margaret looked at Sam, unconscious now, his breathing barely visible. Everything in her screamed to accept the offer, to save herself, to flee this violence and death. But then she remembered his arms around her during the storm, his quiet pride when she'd learned to shoot, the way he'd said her name like a prayer in the darkness. "He's my husband," she called back. "For better or worse, and you'll have to come through me to get him." Morrison laughed. "Have it your way. Mrs. Thornton, boys, burn them out. Margaret saw the flicker of torches approaching and made a desperate decision. She couldn't defend the house and tend Sam, but maybe, just maybe, she could buy time. She grabbed the box of ammunition and the spare rifle, then helped Sam to his feet. "Cellar," she gasped. "We're going to the root cellar." He was barely conscious, leaning heavily on her as they stumbled to the trap door. The cellar was small, dank, but stone-lined and defensible. She lowered him down, then grabbed water, bandages, and her medical supplies before following. Above them, she heard glass breaking, then the crackle of fire. Smoke began seeping through the floorboards. Morrison's men were laughing, calling taunts, certain they'd won. In the darkness of the cellar, Margaret worked by feel to rebandage Sam's wound. He was burning up, delirious, calling for Mary. Margaret held him close, whispering reassurances he couldn't hear, and prayed for a miracle. The miracle came with dawn, hoofbeats, lots of them, and Tom Brennan's booming voice. "Morrison, stand down!" The neighboring ranchers had come, just as they'd promised. Margaret heard shouting, a few shots, then Morrison's men retreating. She pushed open the cellar door to find their house a smoking ruin, but Brennan and 6 other men surrounding the property. "Dear God," Brennan said when he saw Sam. "Pete, ride for the doctor, fast as you can." They carried Sam to the Brennan ranch, Margaret refusing to leave his side. The doctor, when he finally arrived, looked grave. "The bullet's deep, near the shoulder blade. I'll have to operate, and even then—" "Do it," Margaret said. The surgery took 3 hours. Margaret waited outside, pacing, praying, bargaining with God. "Mrs." Brennan tried to comfort her, but Margaret couldn't sit still, couldn't eat, couldn't think beyond the next breath. When the doctor emerged, his face was exhausted but hopeful. "I got the bullet out. He's strong. If infection doesn't set in, he might make it. The next few days will tell." Margaret spent those days at Sam's bedside. She bathed his fever, forced water between his cracked lips, talked to him about everything and nothing. She told him about her childhood in Ohio, about meeting James, about dreams she'd forgotten she had. She described the ranch as it would be when rebuilt, better than before, with a real glass window and flowers by the porch. On the 3rd night, his fever broke. Margaret was dozing in her chair when she felt his hand move in hers. "Margaret?" His voice was barely a whisper. She jerked awake, tears streaming down her face. "I'm here. I'm right here. The house? Gone, but we'll rebuild." She smoothed his hair back. "Morrison's in jail. Brennan and the others caught him trying to leave the territory. They found evidence, bills of sale for stolen cattle, records of bribes. He won't hurt anyone again." Sam's eyes searched her face. "You stayed. Through all of it. Where else would I go?" She tried to smile through her tears. "You're stuck with me, Sam Thornton." "Margaret," he struggled to speak, his hand tightening on hers. When I thought I was dying, all I could think was that I'd never told you, never said the words. You don't have to. I love you." The words came out raw, desperate. "Not because you're my wife. Not because you stayed. I love your courage, your stubbornness, the way you hum when you're cooking. I love how you made me remember what it feels like to hope." Margaret bent down and kissed him gently, tasting her own tears. "I love you too. I think I have for a while now. I just didn't know it until I almost lost you." They stayed like that, foreheads touching, breathing the same air, while outside the sun rose on a new day. There would be challenges ahead, rebuilding the ranch, healing from wounds both physical and emotional, but they would face them together. No longer 2 strangers bound by necessity, but partners bound by choice and love. "We're going to make it, aren't we?" Sam asked. "Yes," Margaret said, and for the first time since leaving Denver, she truly believed it. "We're going to make it." The doctor insisted Sam stay at the Brennan ranch for 2 weeks to heal properly. Margaret divided her time between nursing him and salvaging what she could from their burned home. The neighboring ranchers pitched in, bringing lumber and supplies, helping clear the debris. It was the kind of community she'd dreamed of finding in the West, rough-edged but loyal, suspicious of outsiders but fierce in protecting their own. "You've changed this valley," Tom Brennan told her one evening. "Shown us what it means to stand together. Sam's lucky to have you." "We're lucky to have each other," Margaret replied, watching through the window as Sam took his first careful steps around the yard. When they finally returned to their land, it was to a foundation already laid by their neighbors, a barn frame rising against the sky. Sam stood supported by Margaret, surveying the work with wonder. "Home," he said quietly. "Home." She agreed, and felt the truth of it in her bones. Not just a place, but a partnership forged in fire and tested by storms both literal and figurative. They were no longer the desperate woman and bitter man who'd stood at that altar months ago. They were something new, something stronger. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Margaret leaned into Sam's solid warmth and smiled. They had won more than just a battle against Morrison. They had won the right to their future, together. The new house rose from the ashes like a declaration of defiance. Sam worked despite doctor's orders, his wound still tender but his determination fierce. Margaret matched him board for board, her hands now calloused and capable, no longer the soft hands of a Denver widow. Together they built something stronger than what had been destroyed. Wider windows to let in light, a proper kitchen with room to move, a porch that wrapped around two sides where they could watch the sunrise and sunset. But rebuilding brought unexpected challenges. The fire had consumed not just their home, but their reputation as well. In town, whispers followed Margaret like dust devils. "She brought violence to the valley." "Mrs." Henderson muttered to her companions outside the general store, loud enough for Margaret to hear. First a widow, now practically a widow-maker, Sam Thornton was better off alone. Margaret kept her head high, selecting her supplies with steady hands, but the words stung, especially when she saw how the other women pulled their skirts aside as she passed, as if misfortune might be contagious. "Don't pay them any mind," Sam said when she told him that evening. They sat on their half-finished porch, watching the stars emerge. Small minds need someone to blame. "They're not entirely wrong," Margaret said quietly. "Morrison came after you because of me. If you'd stayed unmarried, I'd be dead." His voice was flat, certain. Morrison had been circling for years. "You didn't bring trouble. Margaret, you gave me something worth fighting for." Still, the isolation wore on her. The neighboring ranchers remained friendly, but their wives kept their distance. At Sunday services, held in the schoolhouse since the church needed repairs, Margaret sat with Sam in the back, feeling the weight of turned backs and whispered conversations. The breaking point came when young Sarah Patterson, the minister's daughter, approached Margaret after service. The girl, no more than 16, had always been kind. But now her mother yanked her away with a sharp, "We don't associate with women who bring death to our doorsteps." Margaret fled, her composure finally cracking. She found herself at the small cemetery on the hill, standing before a weathered stone that read, "Mary Thornton, beloved wife." She'd avoided this place, feeling like an intruder. Now she sank to her knees, tears flowing freely. "I'm trying," she whispered to the stone. "I'm trying to be what he needs, what this place needs. But I don't know how to be you. I don't know how to belong here." "You don't need to be here." Margaret whirled to find Sam behind her, his face drawn with concern. He lowered himself carefully beside her, favoring his healing wound. "You should be resting," she said. "Saw you leave church. Figured I'd find you here." He was quiet for a moment, studying his first wife's grave. Mary was born to this life. Her father ran cattle. Her mother made soap and preserves. She could birth a calf and bake bread with equal skill. The town loved her because she was one of them. "Everything I'm not. Everything you don't need to be." Sam turned to face her fully. Mary was a good woman, and I mourned her truly, but she never challenged me, never made me think beyond the next season's calving or the price of beef. She accepted this life as it was, never dreaming it could be different. He touched Margaret's face, wiping away tears with his thumb. You came here a stranger and made us all strangers to ourselves, showed us we could stand together instead of apart, proved a woman could fight beside her man and not behind him. You think that's weakness? It's the greatest strength I've ever seen. The town will come around, and if they don't, to hell with them. The profanity, rare from Sam, made her laugh despite her tears. I didn't marry you for the town's approval. I married you because I had to, and now I thank God every day for that necessity. They knelt together in the cemetery, two people bound by loss and reborn through fire. Finally, Sam stood and offered her his hand. Come on, let's go home. As they walked back, Margaret noticed a buggy approaching their ranch. Her heart sank, expecting more trouble. But as it drew closer, she recognized the passenger, Mrs. Brennan, Tom's wife, with a basket on her lap. Thought you might enjoy some fresh bread, the older woman said, climbing down. And maybe some company, if you're willing. Margaret glanced at Sam, who nodded encouragingly. I'd like that, she said. Mrs. Brennan smiled. Good, because I have a bone to pick with you. Margaret Thornton, my Tom's been going on about community and standing together ever since your fight with Morrison. Now he wants to organize a proper town council, maybe even a school fund. You've got him thinking like a politician instead of a rancher. I'm sorry, Margaret ventured. Don't be. It's about time someone shook the dust off this valley. Mrs. Brennan's eyes twinkled. Though I warn you, once the other wives realize what you've started, they'll either thank you or curse you. Possibly both. They spent the afternoon on the porch, talking and planning. Mrs. Brennan had a sharp wit and a practical mind, and by the time she left, Margaret felt less alone than she had in months. Changes came slowly. A few women nodded to her in town. Sarah Patterson slipped her a small embroidered handkerchief with a whispered, "Thank you for standing up to the bullies." The schoolteacher asked if Margaret might help with the older students' reading, given her education. But the real transformation came the day Pastor Patterson himself appeared at their door. The thin man looked even more bent than usual, his face grave. Mrs. Thornton, Mr. Thornton, I've come to apologize. My wife, her words were unchristian. Fear makes fools of us all, but that's no excuse. He paused, gathering himself. I'd like to ask a favor. This Sunday marks the Harvest Festival. Traditionally, we choose a couple to lead the first dance, a couple who represents what we hope to be as a community. I can think of no one more appropriate than you both. Margaret felt Sam stiffen beside her, ready to refuse, but she placed a hand on his arm. We'd be honored, she said. The Harvest Festival filled the town square with lanterns and laughter. Fiddle music carried on the crisp autumn air. When Pastor Patterson called for the opening dance, a hush fell over the crowd. Margaret and Sam walked to the center of the square, aware of every eye upon them. Sam was not a graceful dancer. His movements were careful, still protecting his healing wound. But he held her like she was precious, his eyes never leaving her face. As they turned in slow circles, Margaret heard murmurs from the crowd. Look at how he watches her. She stayed through the worst of it. Maybe we misjudged. Other couples joined them, the square filling with movement and music. Tom Brennan whirled by with his wife, tipping his hat. The schoolteacher danced with the banker, both nodding respectfully. Even Mrs. Patterson, stone-faced and rigid, allowed her husband to lead her onto the floor. As the dance ended, Sam pulled Margaret close. You did it, he murmured. You won them over. We did it, she corrected. Then, louder, for any who cared to hear. Together. The night deepened, filled with music and fellowship. Children chased fireflies between the dancers. Ranchers discussed plans for cooperative grain purchases. Women exchanged recipes and gossip, occasionally glancing at Margaret with something approaching acceptance. "Mrs. Thornton?" Sarah Patterson appeared at her elbow, eyes bright with excitement. "My mother says I may call on you next week, if you're willing. She says I could learn from your example." Margaret glanced across the square to where Mrs. Patterson stood, her expression still stern but no longer hostile. The woman gave the slightest nod, a concession, an acknowledgement. "I'd enjoy that very much," Margaret told the girl. As the festival wound down, Sam and Margaret walked home beneath a canopy of stars. The rebuilt house waited for them, windows glowing with lamplight, solid and welcoming against the darkness. "No regrets?" Sam asked as they climbed the porch steps. Margaret considered the question, thought of James, of Denver, of the woman she'd been. That life felt like a story someone else had lived. This was her reality now, calloused hands and a strong back, a husband who'd learned to love her, a community slowly learning to accept her. "None," she said, and meant it. "This is where I belong." Sam smiled, the full, true smile that transformed his weathered face. "Then welcome home, Mrs. Thornton. Welcome home." They went inside together, leaving the door open to let in the night air and the distant sound of fiddle music. Margaret lit the stove to make tea while Sam settled into his chair, the domestic rhythm as comfortable as breathing. Outside, coyotes called from the hills, but the sound no longer seemed threatening. It was simply part of the wild chorus of their chosen life, a life built on foundations stronger than wood and stone, stronger even than the forces that had tried to tear them apart. The drought began in June, subtle at first, a few weeks without rain, grass browning earlier than usual. By July, the streams ran low and sluggish. August brought hot winds that sucked moisture from the earth, leaving it cracked like broken pottery. The cattle grew gaunt, clustering around the shrinking water holes. Sam stood at what had been their most reliable spring, now reduced to a muddy trickle. "At this rate, we'll lose half the herd before September's out." Margaret knelt beside him, touching the parched earth. 6 months had passed since the fire, since they'd rebuilt and found their place in the community. Now, nature itself seemed determined to test them. "The Brennans are talking about selling," she said. "Moving to California, where there's still water." "Can't blame them." Sam's face was grim beneath the relentless sun. "A man can fight rustlers and storms, but you can't shoot a drought." They rationed water carefully, hauling it from the deepest wells to keep the garden alive, sharing what they could spare with the horses and milk cow. The beef cattle would have to fend for themselves on what moisture remained in the sparse vegetation. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching another blazing sunset, Sam spoke the words Margaret had been dreading. "Maybe we should consider it too. Selling. Starting fresh somewhere else." "No." The word came out harder than she intended. "We've fought too hard for this place. Fighting won't make it rain. Margaret." She stood, pacing to the porch rail. "Remember what you told me when I first came here? This land takes more than it gives. But we're still here. We survived Morrison, the fire, the town's judgment. We'll survive this too." "With what water?" His voice held a weariness she'd never heard before. "The wells are failing. Another month without rain and then we'll find water." She turned to face him, fierce with determination. "There has to be underground springs, hidden aquifers. The Indians lived here for generations. They knew secrets we haven't learned yet." Sam studied her face, something shifting in his expression. "You really won't give up, will you? I didn't come all this way. Survive all we've survived, to quit now." She moved to stand before him, taking his weathered hands in hers. "This is our home, Sam, the only home I want." They began the search the next day. Sam remembered old-timers' tales about year-round springs in the canyonlands. They rode out before dawn, exploring ravines and hidden valleys, looking for signs, greenery that shouldn't exist, depressions where water might gather, the particular quality of stone that suggested underground streams. Days passed in fruitless searching. Their neighbors continued their exodus. The Carsons first, then 2 more families. The town grew quieter, businesses closing as customers disappeared. Even Pastor Patterson spoke of accepting a position in Nevada. "Fools," Sam muttered one night as they returned empty-handed again. But Margaret heard the fear beneath his anger. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Sarah Patterson arrived one morning, her normally neat appearance disheveled from hard riding. "Mrs. Thornton, my grandfather's journal. I was packing his books and found it. Look!" She thrust a leather-bound book at Margaret, pages marked with pressed flowers. Margaret read the faded ink, her heart racing. The old man had been one of the territory's first settlers, and his notes described a hidden spring in the mountains, where the red rocks split like praying hands. Water flows eternal from the earth's deep heart. "I know that place," Sam said, reading over her shoulder. "It's a full day's ride, rough country. If there's water there..." They set out at first light with picks, shovels, and hope. The journey took them through landscapes growing more desolate by the day. Skeletal trees, dried stream beds, the bones of cattle who'd walked too far from water. The red rocks appeared near sunset, 2 towering formations that indeed resembled hands pressed in prayer. Between them lay a narrow canyon choked with boulders and dead brush. No sign of water. But Margaret noticed something, a different quality to the air, a coolness that shouldn't exist. They made camp and began exploring at dawn. Hours passed in backbreaking work, moving rocks, digging where the ground seemed most promising. The sun climbed mercilessly. Their water ran low. "1 more hour," Sam said, sweat streaming down his face. "Then we head back." Margaret drove her shovel deep into a depression between 2 large boulders. The earth here was different, darker, with a clay-like consistency. "Sam, help me here." Together they dug, the hole deepening rapidly. 3 feet down, the soil grew damp. 4 feet, and Margaret's shovel struck something that wasn't rock or dirt. "Wood?" Sam knelt, brushing away soil to reveal old timbers, the remains of a cover someone had built long ago. They pried up the rotting boards to find a natural spring bubbling up from deep underground, crystal clear and cold. "My God," Sam breathed. "It's really here." They tested the water, pure and sweet. The spring's flow was steady, emerging from some deep aquifer unaffected by surface drought. Working with fevered energy, they cleared the area, revealing a natural basin that could be enlarged and channeled. "We'll need pipe," Margaret said, her mind racing with possibilities. "We can run it down to the valley, create a proper irrigation system, with water guaranteed. People will come back." Sam pulled her into his arms, spinning her around like they were dancing again. "You magnificent, stubborn woman, you've saved us all." They rode home with the news of salvation. Word spread like wildfire, water in the mountains, enough for everyone. The exodus halted. Men gathered with tools and determination, following Sam back to the spring. They worked in shifts through the brutal heat, laying pipe, building channels, creating a lifeline for the valley. Tom Brennan canceled his plans to leave. "Should have known better than to give up while a Thornton still stood," he said, clapping Sam on the shoulder. The project took 3 weeks of communal effort. Margaret organized the women to provide meals for the workers, turning hardship into fellowship. Even Mrs. Patterson, her California dreams postponed, worked alongside her. "I misjudged you terribly," the minister's wife admitted one evening as they served supper to the exhausted men. "You've shown more Christian charity than I ever did. We all do what we must to survive." Margaret replied, "Sometimes that means fighting. Sometimes it means forgiving." The day water first flowed from the mountains to the valley. The entire community gathered to witness it. Clear, cold water poured from the pipes into hastily built troughs and irrigation channels. Children splashed and laughed. Men removed their hats in something like reverence. Women wept with relief. Pastor Patterson led a prayer of thanksgiving, his voice breaking with emotion. "Lord, we thank you for this miracle and for those who wouldn't let us give up hope." That evening, Sam and Margaret sat on their porch, watching their cattle drink deeply from newly filled troughs. The sunset painted the mountains purple and gold, and for the first time in months, clouds gathered on the horizon, real clouds, heavy with promise. "You know what this means," Sam said quietly. "The valley will grow now. More settlers, more businesses. It won't be the isolated place we've known." "Change isn't always bad," Margaret replied. "Look at us. We changed, and we're stronger for it." "That we are." He took her hand, threading their fingers together. "Margaret, there's something I've been wanting to ask. These past months, fighting beside you, building with you, it's shown me what real partnership means. So I'm wondering," he paused, seeming to gather courage, "would you marry me?" She looked at him in confusion. "Sam, we're already—" "No!" He slid from his chair to kneel beside her, his eyes earnest. "We had a transaction before, born of desperation. I'm asking for something different now. Would you choose to marry me, not because you have to, but because you want to? Let me court you proper. Then stand before the town and declare our choice." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She understood what he was offering, not just a renewal of vows, but an acknowledgement of how far they'd come, from strangers bound by necessity to partners bound by love. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you, Sam Thornton." Again and always. He rose and kissed her as the first drops of rain began to fall, gentle at first, then harder, until water poured from the sky like a benediction. They stood on the porch, arms around each other, faces tilted to the storm. "I'm ready now," Margaret said, remembering another storm, another moment when she'd clung to those words in fear. Now she spoke them in joy. "For all of it, the good and bad, the struggles and victories, I'm ready." "So am I," Sam replied, holding her close as rain washed the thirsty land clean. "So am I." In the distance, thunder rolled across the mountains, but it sounded like celebration rather than threat. The drought was breaking. The valley would survive and thrive, and two people who had begun as strangers had found their way through fire and hardship to something precious and unbreakable. As the rain fell and the earth drank deep, Margaret pressed closer to Sam and smiled. She'd traveled far from that desperate widow in Bitter Creek, farther than miles could measure. She'd found strength she never knew she possessed, love she never expected to feel again, and a home worth every battle they'd fought to keep it. The West had tested them with everything it had. They had not merely survived, they had triumphed, together, under the vast sky of their hard-won paradise. With rain drumming on the roof and hope flooding back to the valley, Margaret Thornton was exactly where she belonged. She was home. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining us on this incredible journey through the Wild West. We hope Margaret and Sam's story touched your heart as much as it did ours. Where are you listening to this story from? Please share in the comments below. We'd love to connect with you. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more tales of love, courage, and survival in the American frontier. What did you think of Margaret's transformation? How did Sam's character growth affect you? Share your thoughts with us. Your comments mean the world to us.